let's get on to politics. Awkward, always an awkward conversation in some. And today we're actually going to make it a little bit more awkward because we're going to be talking about the divide, the great divide in politics. Now, obviously, we're well influenced by American media and everything like that. We see everything that's happening in the Republicans versus Democrats, and it just seems to be the divide seems to be getting bigger and bigger. And I saw this article the other day about the fact that there's such a divide that now there's such a divide between Republicans and Democrats that there's now becoming an even bigger divide. Even it's now not just Republican or Democrat. Now you're like, it's MAGA, Republican or Democrat or whatever. And look, no matter where we are in the world, there's always this divide, right? There's always this kind of us versus them. And we see it with our politics in the political realm. We see it with churches, with denominations. We see it with religions. We see it with Queenslanders and New South Welshmen at that particular time of the year. And you know what I'm talking about if you're from that area. You know that if you're wearing blue around that time, oh no, you're on the other team. Or if you're wearing maroon, if you're in the know, you're in the know. And that kind of goes to our point for today is that it's amazing how many we as a society, but even you look at it on even a micro level, that we as humans just have this tendency to be us versus them. We try to put people on the outside. Dr. Rod, why is it that we just as humans, and I'm sure you've seen it in your years and seen it in universities and everything like that, you see the divide between universities. Like, my university is better than your university. I got a degree from this university versus, another one, or even once you get into it, the department heads are like, it's us versus them or whatever. Why do you think it is that we as humans kind of default to this us versus them mentality?
Well, the simple answer is our fallenness.
Mm-hmm.
And in our fallenness, we tend to default to tribalism.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that, God separated Israel, but he didn't separate Israel out because his heart was to develop tribes. He settled Israel out so that he could demonstrate to humanity something about the relationship that he wanted to have with us. And, we're observing increasing tribalism around the world today. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to someone on Talkback Radio just yesterday, as a matter of fact, and they were lamenting the fact that a couple of generations ago, people from different ends of the political spectrum, they could get together, they could have a chat, they could even share about their differences and remain friends.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing that political differences are so important to people that they even cause divorces.
Mm-hmm.
And there certainly have been reports in the United States that people have ended up divorced because one was Republican and one was Democrat. And I find it quite interesting that way before Israel ever had a king, God actually said, well, one of these days, you guys are going to ask me for a king. And in Deuteronomy 17, he gives instructions for kings. And in verses 16 and 17, he says, look, as a king, you're not allowed to accumulate horses and chariots. You're not allowed to accumulate wives, and you're not allowed to accumulate financial riches. You can read it there. When I read that a few months ago, I thought to myself, I can't actually think of kings of Israel or Judah who didn't disobey that. There would have been some, because there were a lot of kings in that period. But on the whole, the famous ones like David and Solomon, they didn't. In fact, that little passage in Deuteronomy 16 to 17 talks about going astray if you marry lots and lots of wives. Now, funnily enough, that's what Solomon did. And it actually turned his head in the end.
Yeah.
Now, yes, the general thing for kings in those days was to seal a relationship with another king by marrying the king's daughter or close relative of the king. And Solomon did that, as every other king did, without actually referring to God or to God's law. Now, we know that towards the end of his reign, Solomon had divided loyalties.
Yeah.
Because he was drawn in one direction by his own heritage as the son of David, but he was actually drawn in another direction because he had married into pagan cultures. Now, the result of his own divided loyalty was the division of Israel into the two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. That happened after his death. And we're seeing this now with world leaders. There are lots of world leaders who have significantly divided loyalties.
Mm.
Now, I won't necessarily name any, but look, there are a number. They make certain claims about their Christian faith, and yet they support, endorse, implement policies that are diametrically opposed to biblical standards.
Mm.
That is a modern day example of divided loyalty. And although in countries like the United States, we're not yet, at least, separating into different nations, there definitely is significant division along political lines.
Yeah.
My thinking on that is, well, that's because the politicians themselves, they have divided loyalties. They're saying on one hand, yep, I'm a Christian. You know, I go to church every Sunday. I uphold the standards of the church. But yet in politics, there's something quite different. I've seen exactly the same thing here in Australia.
Yeah.
And so whereas people who had, if you like, left leanings and right leanings a generation or two ago, they could get together, they could be friends, but recognize, accept and respect their differences. We've now developed an intensely tribal system, which I don't think is healthy for our societies. But I think the root of it actually is divided loyalties. People have divided their loyalties between God and something else.
Yeah.
And that then manifests in divisions among whole societies. And look, for those of you who aspire to politics, good on you. Absolutely good on you. But you need to be absolutely certain that you will have one loyalty ultimately and one loyalty only, and that is loyalty to God. It's an interesting thing, Craig. We were talking about Queen Elizabeth II in our last video, and since then, of course, her funeral has happened, and in most parts of the world, the official mourning period is open. Here in Australia, is closed. Here in Australia, we have an official day of mourning tomorrow, actually, and that will then sort of, as it were, conclude our period of mourning for the Queen. But Archbishop Justin Welby, in his address on the occasion of her funeral, he noted something really, really significant, and it was this: Queen Elizabeth swore her loyalty to God before any human being swore loyalty to her. And I think that was highly significant. Yeah. And one of the things, of course, that marked her reign as monarch was that she had no divided loyalty. Yeah. A magnificent thing. Over 70 years, her loyalty was always to God, and she was quite open about that. We don't see the same thing in a lot of political leaders today. And for those of you who are watching this video, you know, if your calling is politics, good on you, because we definitely need much more Christian influence in politics today. But also take a warning from the life of Solomon. Yeah. He started out well. And in fact, in 1 Kings chapter 4, we read in verses 20 to 25, how he'd actually established a kingdom of peace. And it actually says there, every man lived like in the shadow of his olive tree. They lived in his vineyard, and that was that was symbolic of living in peace and prosperity. That was the kingdom that he developed. It's also the kingdom that is promised by God in Micah 4:4. So ultimately, that's what the second coming of Jesus is going to deliver. But can I just encourage those of you whose calling is in the political area, as political leaders, you need to be absolutely certain of and committed to that one loyalty to God. Have a look at the life of David and the life of Solomon in particular. Have a look at it again in the light of this discussion that Craig and I are having now. I think you'll learn a lot of lessons from it.
There's one thing you mentioned there that was really interesting, is that, like, God said kings shouldn't have wealth. They shouldn't amass their own wealth. And it kind of then, it made me instantly think about, yeah, because they weren't kings. They shouldn't have been kings. They should have been public servants. They weren't there to amass riches and wealth for themselves. They were there to serve the nation and help the nation operate and help the nation become wealthier and better.
Yes.
And it kind of like, that's a perfect correlation with politics today, is the fact that that's one thing that this article said is politicians nowadays aren't necessarily there to try to serve. They're not public servants anymore. They're there to build their own fame, build their own agendas, trying to build their own influence and trying to, kind of like with this whole MAGA thing, is it's kind of gotten bigger than just the Republican Party, which is not just about, serving the people and everything, is now this whole movement of its own. But yeah, what if we just got back to being public servants? Like, went back to that, like, you're just there to serve. What happened to those days of just being there to serve the people? Now, I know not everyone is called to politics, and that's good, because we need them. Don't need too many of them. But as if you're a leader in your organization, be very, very careful about divided loyalties. Be very careful of that division, that they actually call it othering, right? Dr. Rob mentioned tribalism. We do have this natural tendency to find our group and because we feel protected within a group, and then anyone outside that group is a threat to the group. And the othering, they say, psychologists say, it comes from a sense of insecurity, right? That we feel threatened by everyone and anything that is different from us, so they're put on the outside. And it made me, before I get onto that, let me just finish my thought for you leaders that are running businesses or running ministries or whatever. Be very careful of that culture. I want you to go into work today or tomorrow when you're next into work, and around your people, around the people you're leading, try to have a look around and see, where are those divides? Where are there us versus them? Is it the accounts department versus the sales department? Is it the people that are in one office versus another office, or whatever that? You will see there's a divide. Your responsibility as a leader is to make sure there is unity in your organization, to bring people together. It's our responsibility. And like, this is kind of what Dr. Rod is saying is, and when we brought up this topic of, there's so much us versus them. There's so much division in the world. And as you guys know, the verse before I'm even going to say it, house divided against itself can't stand, right? You know that. The reason why all these political parties, all the political systems are really suffering right now is because it's this us versus them as a division. So go into your organizations and make sure you can identify any us versus them culture and see if you can eradicate it. See if you can eradicate that, and see if you can bring unity into your organization, into your ministry, into your family, into your community. Imagine if that was your impact. Imagine if that is what you're able to leave. I'm going to leave it on one last. Actually, how can we do that? How can we do that? There's one really good example that I actually spoke to you about, Dr. Rod, recently, is Steven Crowder, right? It's really interesting where there is no way, we are not expecting everyone to think the same. The world wouldn't operate if we all think the same. We don't need to all do the same. The world wouldn't operate if we didn't all do the same. We can't all be doing the same thing, thinking the same thing. We would just be lemmings then, right? That isn't what God created us to be creative. He made us all unique to be pursuing our own purposes, right? We need to be doing that, but there are differences. How can we stay together and have unity without this us versus them mentality? And Steven Crowder, he's a comedian that is actually a YouTuber, and he has a great political podcast that he has, Louder with Crowder. And he has this segment which is called Change My Mind. So he goes into university, campuses and everything like that, sits down and picks a really dividing topic, right? And he says, this is my thoughts, change my mind around gender identity, around race, around pay gap, whatever it may be. And he actually shared that his key in that is not to he doesn't want to try to convince the other person. He doesn't want to try to change their mind. What he wants is to, first of all, find common ground. Find what do we both agree on? Like he spoke to someone about abortion, and they're like so pro-rights and he's anti-abortion. And he says, look, rather than us going pro-rights versus abortion, can we just at least find somewhere in the middle? Do we agree that at some point there's a baby there and killing that baby is wrong? Can we at least agree that, right? And so even on such a polarizing topic, he finds unity in a point. And so if we want to try to avoid that division in our organizations, let's find that unity in that place as well.
Oh, that's a great point, because that's not asking us to compromise, it's asking us to explore. And often when you sit down and explore with people, you discover that you're not quite as far apart as you might have imagined.
Yep, and we're not as smart as we think we are. We can always learn more, which is why I love chatting with Dr. Rod. I'm always learning from him. Hey, you just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership Podcast. If you like that, hit the like button and put a comment below. Hey, if you want to watch more videos like this, check out our channel, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe.